Algebra 2. Today we are discussing Chapter 11.3, which is collecting data. This section is a little heavy on the vocab, so we're going to start with different types of samples. So at the top here, we have what's called a random sample, and that is really what you want, is a random sample, because it's a sample where each member of the population has an equal chance of being selected. What we want to try to avoid is an example like, I'm going to take a survey of the sophomore class, but I don't want to, I don't want to go out and find all the members of the sophomore class, so I'm just going to ask my 5 closest friends. That's not a very random survey. So the different types of samples that we can talk about, we have a self-selected sample, which is where members of the population can volunteer to be in the sample. Okay, so you ask a group, hey, who wants to help me with this? And that's who you're going to get. We have a systematic sample, and it says that a rule is used to select members of a population, for instance, every other person or every third person. Next, we have what's called a stratified sample, and a stratified sample is where the whole population is divided into smaller groups that share similar characteristics, and then from that, a sample is randomly selected from each group. So notice that each group, a different random selection of people has occurred. Next, we have a cluster sample. It is similar to the stratified in that we have it's divided into groups, but then all the members from one or more clusters is selected. And so instead of picking a couple out of each group, we're going to pick all of one group. And the last is a convenience sample, which is what I was talking about when I said, I'm just going to find my 5 closest friends. A convenient sample is that only members of the population who are easy to reach. So maybe my friends or the people closest to me, those are the ones that are surveyed. That is not a good representation of a whole population. So the first thing we're going to do then is to try to identify what type of sample was done. So if you look at your extra practice, we're going to start out with number 1. A restaurant owner wants to know whether the customers are satisfied with the service. So every 5th customer who exits the restaurant is surveyed. So what type of survey is this, or what type of sample? If you went back and looked, this is systematic, which is where every 5th person, every other person is picked. Up next, we have an electronic manufacturer wants to know the customer's responses towards a newly released media player. Emails are sent to customers who recently purchased the device to participate in an online survey at their convenience. So what type of sampling is this? This is going to be self-selected. And the reason it's self-selected is because the people who respond are self-selecting that they respond to this survey. People who don't want to respond aren't going to respond. All right, last we have a survey is conducted in a state to find out how many households own more than one vehicle. Households are divided into north, south, east, and west regions of the state, and a sample is randomly surveyed from each region. So which type groups them and then takes the survey from each group? That would be stratified. Okay, so you probably want all those pictures there as you're going through your homework so that you can help decide which one you're picking here. Up next, we're going to talk about biases in sampling. So you don't want a bias, okay? So a bias is an error that results in misrepresentation of a population. So hey, my sample found out that all juniors love chocolate ice cream. Okay, well, if I only asked my 3 friends and we all love the same kind of ice cream, then that's pretty biased to the whole population. So you really want an unbiased sample. That gives you a true representation of the population. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit about how to have an unbiased survey. So a biased sample, though, if you do happen to have a biased sample is one that either overrepresents or underrepresents part of the population. Okay, so it's not a true representation. It's either overrepresenting or underrepresenting. So one thing that can get you a biased sample is how you picked your sample, like my closest friends, okay? The other thing that can lead you to having a biased sample is because you asked biased questions. Okay, and these are questions that are flawed in some way that leads to inaccurate results. So you might encourage a particular response. So like, hey, don't you really like such and such? You might word it so that you're leading them to a particular response. You might also be asking maybe too sensitive of a question for a truthful answer. Okay, or maybe you ask something that actually addresses more than one issue, but you're kind of hiding what you're looking for in there, so it kind of gets overlooked. So these are different ways that you can ask a biased question, and that would lead to a biased sample. So for these next two problems, we want to identify what kind of sample was taken and to explain why the sample is biased. So a manager of a company wants to determine whether the employees are satisfied with the lounge room. The manager surveys the employees who are in the lounge room during the break. So what type of sample from the pictures that I showed you do you think this is? This is going to be a convenience sample. And it's convenience because he's just sampling those that are right there. It's convenient for him to do so. And probably if they're in the lounge room during their break, do we think they like the lounge room? Probably. So that would be the why is it biased, right? Because if they're in the lounge room, then they probably like the room. Okay. Number 5, a news station asks its viewers to participate in an online poll about presidential candidates. So what type of sample is this? This again is going to be self-selected. Only those who want to respond are going to respond. Okay, why is this biased? Well, if you've ever been a part of a survey or you've read the results from a survey, it's because probably only those with strong opinions are going to respond. So you're either going to have really great things or really bad things. The people who just kind of don't care in the middle don't usually respond to those types of things. And then that's what leads you to have a biased sample. All right, the last thing we're going to cover today is methods of collecting data. So we have an experiment. It imposes a treatment on individuals in order to collect data on their response to the treatment. The treatment may be medical or it can be any action that might affect a variable in the experiment, such as adding methanol to gasoline and then measuring its effect on fuel efficiency. So that would be an experiment that I could collect data on, like on fuel efficiency. We have observational studies, and it observes individuals and measures variables without controlling the individuals or the environment. So this is just somebody on the outside looking in. We have a survey, and it's an investigation of one or more characteristics of a population. So you're actually asking questions. Okay, last we have a simulation, and it uses a model to reproduce the conditions of a situation or process so that the situated outcomes closely match the real world outcomes. So this might be some kind of mock trial or some kind of, let's say, war game, something like that, that you can run through a simulation. So can we identify the method of data collection these situations describe, which is what we were just talking about, those 4 things. A researcher records whether shoppers at a grocery store buy magazines at the checkout aisle while waiting in line to check out. So they're just observing, they're just watching. So which one of those methods is true here, or which one of them is being used here? And this is an observational study. So the fact that I could say that they were just observing leads us to know that that's an observational study. All right, and our last one. A meteorologist uses a computer model to track the trajectory of a hurricane. That's going to be the last one, which is going to be a simulation. Like they've set it up to run to see what's going to happen, and that's just going to be a simulation. All right, that's it for 11.3. Let me know if you have questions. I'll talk to you later.